We've all been there. It's 3 a.m. The house is silent, but your mind is a thunderstorm. You are staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of a world that demands more than you can give. This is where we find David in Psalm 4. He isn't writing from a throne of gold, he's writing from a place of pressure. Scholars call this a lament, but I call it the survival guide for the overwhelmed. In verse 1, David says, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness." Notice the legal terminology here. David isn't begging like a stranger, he's appealing to a covenant. In the original Hebrew, the word for distress implies being in a tight, narrow place, a canyon with no exit. But David notes that God has given him room, the scholarly insight. Peace doesn't always mean the situation changes. It means your internal capacity expands. God doesn't always move the walls of the canyon. Sometimes He just gives you the strength to stand tall within them. This is a profound request. Writing a 12,000-word script, 3,000 words per part, is a massive undertaking that would translate to about 1.5 to 2 hours of spoken content. To give you the quality of a great scholar and the flair of a top YouTuber, I have structured a comprehensive, high-level script outline and the full content for part 1. This establishes the scholarly depth and the engaging tone you need. YouTube script, Psalm 4, The Divine Path to Peace, series title, The Architecture of Trust Host Persona. Scholarly, empathetic, grounded, and insightful. Part 1, The Anatomy of an Urgent Cry, 3,000 words. Focus verses 1 to 2, The Distress of the Soul and the Vanity of the World. The hook, The Midnight Anxiety. We've all been there. It's 3 a.m. The house is silent, but your mind is a thunderstorm. You are staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of a world that demands more than you can give. This is where we find David in Psalm 4. He isn't writing from a throne of gold. He's writing from a place of pressure. Scholars call this a lament, but I call it the survival guide for the overwhelmed. Section 1, the theology of answer me. In verse 1, David says, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness." Notice the legal terminology here. David isn't begging like a stranger. He's appealing to a covenant. In the original Hebrew, the word for distress implies being in a tight, narrow place, a canyon with no exit. But David notes that God has given him room. The scholarly insight, peace doesn't always mean the situation changes. It means your internal capacity expands. God doesn't always move the walls of the canyon. Sometimes He just gives you the strength to stand tall within them. Verse 2 shifts the gaze from God to the critics. "O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame?" We live in a reputation economy. Whether it's social media likes or workplace politics, we are constantly chased by shame. David asks a piercing question. How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? The modern application, we seek peace in things that cannot breathe. We seek stability in the shifting sands of public opinion. Real peace begins when you stop asking, "What do they think of me?" and start asking, "What does the eternal think of me?" We've all been there. It's 3 a.m. The house is silent, but your mind is a thunderstorm. You are staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of a world that demands more than you can give. This is where we find David in Psalm 4. He isn't writing from a throne of gold. He's writing from a place of pressure. Scholars call this a lament, but I call it the survival guide for the overwhelmed. Section 1, the theology of answer me. In verse 1, David says, "Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness." Notice the legal terminology here. David isn't begging like a stranger. He's appealing to a covenant. In the original Hebrew, the word for distress implies being in a tight, narrow place, a canyon with no exit. But David notes that God has given him room. The scholarly insight, peace doesn't always mean the situation changes. It means your internal capacity expands. God doesn't always move the walls of the canyon. Sometimes He just gives you the strength to stand tall within them. Section 2, the vanity of the crowd. Verse 2 shifts the gaze from God to the critics. O men, how long shall my honor be turned into shame? We live in a reputation economy. Whether it's social media likes or workplace politics, we are constantly chased by shame. David asks a piercing question: how long will you love vain words and seek after lies? The modern application: we seek peace in things that cannot breathe. We seek stability in the shifting sands of public opinion. Real peace begins when you stop asking, what do they think of me? And start asking, what does the Eternal think of me? The word Selah appears here. It's a musical notation, a pause. In our fast-paced world, we hate pausing, but you cannot find peace without a pause. You cannot hear the whisper of God over the roar of your own hurry. The stillness of the midnight hour is where the true battle for the human soul is either won or lost. And it is exactly here that we find the opening heartbeat of Psalm 4. To understand this text like a scholar and feel it like a poet, we must first recognize that David is not writing a dry theological treatise, but a survival manual for the spirit. He begins with a cry that shatters the silence. Answer me when I call, O God of my righteousness. This is not the timid whisper of a stranger, but the bold appeal of a man who knows his standing before the Eternal. In the original Hebrew, the term for righteousness suggests a legal right or a covenantal bond. David is reminding himself that his peace does not depend on his own perfection, but on the character of a God who has already declared him justified. When you feel the world closing in on you, the first step to divine peace is shifting your gaze from the chaos of your circumstances to the consistency of your Creator. The scholar notes that David uses a fascinating metaphor when he says that God has given him room when he was in distress. The word for distress in the ancient text refers to a narrow place or a tight gorge where the walls are pressing against the ribs, making it impossible to breathe. Most of us spend our lives praying for God to take us out of the canyon, but the miracle of Psalm 4 is that God creates space within the canyon. He expands your internal capacity to handle the external pressure. This is the definition of spiritual maturity, where the storm still rages, but the heart has found a wide open field of grace in which to rest. If you are feeling suffocated by debt, by loneliness, or by the expectations of others, you must realize that God's primary work is often an interior expansion. He gives you the room to breathe before He changes the scenery of your life. As we move deeper into the psyche of this prayer, we see David turn his attention to the source of his agitation, which is the crowd. He asks, how long will men turn His honor into shame, and how long will they love vain words and seek after lies? Here we find a timeless critique of the human condition. We are a species obsessed with reputation and the opinion of the collective. We live in what could be called a vanity economy, where we trade our peace for the approval of people who are just as broken as we are. The scholar recognizes that David is identifying the root of all anxiety, which is the pursuit of emptiness. When you seek peace in things that cannot breathe, or in voices that have no eternal weight, you will always be left in a state of spiritual malnutrition. To find the peace that surpasses understanding, you must be willing to be misunderstood by the world. You must accept that your honor is held in God's hand, not in the fickle palms of your critics. This brings us to the profound interruption of the word Selah. In the structure of a spiritual masterpiece, this is the moment where the music stops and the soul is forced to sit with the truth. We live in a world that is terrified of the pause. We fill every gap with noise, with scrolling, and with distraction because we are afraid of what we might hear in the silence. But the great scholar of the soul knows that peace is a product of reflection. You cannot process the deliverance of God if you are constantly running toward the next crisis. Selah is a command to let the reality of God's presence catch up to your racing pulse. It is the bridge between the cry of the victim and the song of the victor. By pausing, David is teaching us that our urgency does not move God, but our stillness allows us to be moved by Him. Furthermore, we must look at the distinction David makes when he declares that the Lord has set apart the godly for Himself. This is the doctrine of election meeting the reality of daily life. To be set apart means to be dedicated for a specific purpose, like a vessel in a temple. When you realize that you belong to the divine, you begin to understand that your life is not a series of random accidents, but a curated journey. Your peace becomes unshakable when you realize that if you are God's property, then your problems are God's responsibility. This is the scholarly secret of the Hasid, or the faithful one. The God-like person is not someone who never feels fear, but someone who takes that fear and places it on the altar of God's sovereignty. In the final stretch of this opening movement, David addresses the concept of the inner monologue. He tells his audience to tremble and do not sin, and to commune with their own hearts upon their beds. This is a masterclass in emotional intelligence. He does not tell us to suppress our anger or hide our trembling. Instead, he directs that energy inward and upward. He suggests that the bed, the place of vulnerability and rest, is the ultimate sanctuary. Instead of rehearsing the insults of your enemies or the failures of your day, you are called to have a conversation with your own heart in the presence of the Almighty. This internal dialogue is where the vanity of the world is stripped away and the room that God has provided is finally occupied. You must learn to talk to yourself more than you listen to yourself. If you listen to yourself, you will hear only the echoes of your distress. But if you talk to yourself using the promises of God, you will find the path to the peace that allows a soul to sleep in the middle of a war. This is the anatomy of trust that sets the stage for everything that follows in this divine song. In this second movement, we see that peace is not an accident of circumstances, but a deliberate choice of the will. It is the choice to tremble and not sin, the choice to be still in the dark, and the choice to seek the face of God rather than the favors of the world. David is teaching us that the geography of peace is an internal landscape. You do not find peace by traveling to a distant mountain, or by changing your job, or by winning the lottery. You find peace by descending into the depths of your own soul and meeting the God who is already there, waiting in the silence. This is the sacrifice of righteousness that opens the door to the supernatural joy that the world can neither understand nor destroy. This is the preparation of the heart that leads us into the final rest, where the soul finally learns how to sleep in the arms of the infinite. The third movement of this divine script brings us to the intersection of human poverty and celestial abundance, where we discover that the highest form of worship is often found in the lowest moments of life. Having retreated from the clamor of the world and settled the turbulence of the inner heart, David now leads us to the altar of the soul to examine the nature of true sacrifice. The scholar observes that in verse 5, there is a transition from the silence of the bed to the activity of the sanctuary as the command is given to offer the sacrifices of righteousness and put your trust in the Lord. This is a revolutionary concept because it moves religion away from the mere performance of rituals and into the realm of the ethical and the relational. In the ancient world, a sacrifice was something you gave up to get something back. But in the economy of Psalm 4, a sacrifice is something you offer because you have already found everything you need in God. It is the act of giving God your right to be bitter, your right to be anxious, and your right to control your own destiny. When we talk about the sacrifices of righteousness, we are talking about a life that is aligned with the grain of the universe. The scholar notes that righteousness is not a cold moralism, but a whole Passion for the glory of God. It is the decision to maintain integrity when the world around you is profiting from lies. This is a sacrifice because righteousness often feels like a disadvantage in a world that rewards the ruthless. However, David argues that this is the only path to a peace that is not a hollow facade. You cannot have the rest of God while you are carrying the baggage of unrighteousness. To put your trust in the Lord while offering these sacrifices is to acknowledge that God is a better protector of your life than your own schemes could ever be. It is a total surrender of the self-defense mechanisms that we spend our lives building. This is the moment where the spiritual warrior lays down his sword not out of defeat, but out of a supreme confidence in the commander of the heavenly hosts. As we examine the 6th verse, we encounter the haunting question of the masses: who will show us any good? This is the universal groan of humanity looking for a savior in all the wrong places. The scholar recognizes that this question is born out of a profound spiritual exhaustion. When people lose their connection to the divine source, they begin to scavenge for goodness in the debris of the material world. They look for it in the harvest, in the accumulation of wealth, and in the sensory pleasures of life. But David responds with a prayer that reframes the entire human search. Lord, lift up the light of your countenance upon us. This is the scholarly beatific vision brought down to the level of a daily prayer. To have the light of God's face shining upon you is to be under the direct favor and gaze of the Creator. It is the difference between a child wandering in a dark forest and a child looking directly into the smiling eyes of a loving Father. When the light of God's face is upon you, the darkness of the world does not disappear, but it loses its power to terrify. The beauty of this spiritual transition is that it creates a joy that is mathematically impossible according to the logic of the world. David declares in the 7th verse that God has put more joy in his heart than they have when their grain and wine abound. Here the scholar draws a sharp contrast between harvest joy and presence joy. Harvest joy is conditional. It depends on the weather, the soil, and the market. It is a joy that can be stolen by a pestilence or a drought. But the joy that God puts in the heart is an independent variable. It is a supernatural deposit that does not rely on external stimuli. This is the joy of the prisoner who is free in his spirit, and the joy of the poor man who is rich in his soul. It is a deep-seated gladness that actually thrives in the absence of material abundance because it is forced to feed on the bread of heaven. This is the great paradox of the spiritual life. The less you have of the world, the more you can contain of God. This joy is the ultimate proof of the validity of one's faith. The world can imitate peace through medication or distraction, and it can imitate happiness through entertainment, but it cannot replicate the joy of Psalm 4. This joy is a fruit of the Spirit that grows in the soil of trust. The scholar emphasizes that David is not just feeling better, he is experiencing a structural change in his emotional landscape. By offering the sacrifice of righteousness and seeking the face of God, he has bypassed the broken CI sterns of the world and tapped into the artesian well of eternity. This is why he can look at those with overflowing barns and not feel a spark of envy. He has a secret treasure that cannot be taxed, cannot be stolen, and cannot decay. He is moved from the how long of the opening verses to the much more of the closing movement. The implications for the modern seeker are profound. We are taught to believe that our peace is a result of our productivity and our joy is a result of our consumption. But the great scholar of the Psalms stands as a witness against this lie. He shows us that the highest good is not a thing we possess, but a person who possesses us. As we close this third part of the script, we see David standing at the threshold of the ultimate rest. He has processed his pain. He has silenced his soul. He has offered his sacrifice, and he has received his joy. He is now ready to do the one thing that the anxious man finds impossible. He is ready to close his eyes and let go. The journey from the midnight cry to the midnight rest is almost complete, but it requires one final act of total abandonment to the arms of the Father, which we will explore in the concluding chapter of this spiritual odyssey.